They call him Godzilla. Hello, my name is Will, and this is Exploding Helicopter, the podcast seeking radiation to reproduce. After making a splash with his lo-fi, low-budget debut hit Monsters, Gareth Edwards was promptly handed a whopping check for $160 million to reboot the biggest monster movie franchise of all time. So much for working your way up gradually. The resulting film, imaginatively entitled Godzilla, kicked off a new run of films starring the Big G and put in place the first building block for the Monsterverse film series. So on this show, we're going to be taking a look at the film that kicked off this new cycle of city-smashing mayhem, 2014's Godzilla. Now, podcasting has an order, a power to restore balance, and I believe he is that power. With me to review the film is Nick Rehack. Welcome back to the show, buddy.
Thank you so much for having me, Will.
Well, I'm very pleased to have you. I'm always pleased to have you, but today I am pleased because I feel like I am paying you back for all of those terrible films that you have suffered through as the sort of co-host on this particular podcast. And you know, today we're looking at a film from a series you love, Godzilla. Naturally, being something of a sadist, I compelled you to do the Roland Emmerich 1998 version first. But now that we've run out of truly terrible Godzilla movies, I have to give you one that you might actually enjoy. But as I mentioned, you are a big Godzilla fan, so I guess I was interested to understand kind of what you remember of this film coming out, what your hopes were for it, and you know what your fears were for it.
I can remember when the film came out and seeing the trailers in the theater and just that big reveal and him doing his roar, and I'm like, I'm here for it. Like I can't wait. I was just so happy. The only thing I was concerned about was like who the villain was going to be. I didn't want it to turn into, like we had discussed previously for the Roland Emmerich Godzilla, where it's kind of a standalone and he's acting more like a natural disaster than, you know, the alpha predator that he is, if you will. So that was the only thing that concerned me going into it. But I remember sitting in theaters, and we'll talk about it later in the episode, but there's like two moments that happened where like I audibly gasped and was like gripping onto the arms of the chair, like just in pure joy and childhood excitement.
Okay, and I guess you've mentioned a sort of interesting point there about the sort of difference between the Godzilla we get in this film and the Godzilla that we get in the 98 Roland Emmerich version, and that makes me wonder, like, how do you like your Godzilla? Do you like him as a hero, a villain, or as an anti-hero?
I think I got to go anti-hero. He's always coming in, whether people like it or not. He's just kind of stomping in there. But it's always, it's like the Dark Knight, right? It's not the hero we deserve, but the one that we need. It's not the guy that we want protecting us, but he's going to come here and do that. I like that he's just completely misunderstood, and he's just always perceived as a threat, and that's humanity. If we see something largely different that we don't understand, we immediately, you know, back up in fear and try to destroy it until it helps us. And then we're like, all right, but I'm watching you. And then we create these organizations and shadow governments to watch and try to weaponize it. And I don't know. It's a lot of Godzilla films kind of rinse and repeat, right? We know he shows up, smacks the villain around, leaves, comes back, gets smacked around by the villain, and then, you know, finally comes up at the end. But there's just something about that coming back to it and being, you know, I know you guys don't like me, but I'm doing this, whether you like it or not, whether it helps you or not, like this is for me. And it's I don't know, it just feels good seeing that sometimes.
There's been over like 30 Godzilla films now, and I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here. How often, obviously in the very first Godzilla movie, he's, I guess, a villain. But then, obviously, in later Godzilla films, he's very much a hero, and then sometimes he's more ambiguous. Are you able to kind of put a number on like how often he's a very clear-cut hero versus a very clear-cut villain, and how often he's something in between? Is there, where do the numbers fall on that?
Out of, I think it's like 34 or 35 films that have been done so far, I feel like there's maybe like three of them immediately jump to mind as him as a villain. The first one obviously is the original Godzilla 54 because the whole thing is just one big parable and metaphor for nuclear war. And the other two, pretty much the same title, Godzilla vs. Kong or Godzilla vs. King Kong, both the original and the newer one. Godzilla's kind of coming in like a villain because everyone is a little more sympathetic to King Kong. There's been way more iterations of the King Kong film over and over and over again than there has been Godzilla. Even on the initial release of the very first Godzilla vs. King Kong, in the American version, King Kong wins. In the Japanese version, Godzilla wins. And then we have the most recent one where Godzilla's coming out hard, and there's some moments in the newer Godzilla vs. Kong film from last year where I'm like, buddy, let's back up a little bit. Let's pull back, man. Like, you guys are you're in this together. Like, you should really become friends soon. But overall, like I said, those three jump out. There might be one or two that I'm not thinking about right now, but I think for the most part, he's an anti-hero. He shows up. There's a few where he's like truly the hero. Something in like one of my favorites from '89, Godzilla vs. Biollante, and some of the original Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, the Terror of Mechagodzilla, everything like that, where clearly there's an alien force and Godzilla's coming in to knock him out. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I think it's time that we got stuck into Godzilla 2014. So let's listen to Ken Watanabe breathlessly deliver some exposition.
In 1954, we awakened something.
Well, there's nuclear tests in the Pacific. Not tests.
They were trying to kill it.
You have no idea what's coming.
Can you kill it?
The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control. And not the other way around.
Brody, a Navy bomb expert, has just reunited with his family in San Francisco when he is forced to go to Japan to help his estranged father Joe. Soon both men are swept up in an escalating crisis when Godzilla rises from the sea to combat malevolent adversaries that threaten the survival of humanity. In the cast, we have Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Bryan Cranston, Ken Watanabe, Elizabeth Olsen, David Strathairn, and in a blink and you'll miss it role, we have Euro cinema royalty Juliette Binoche. This was the 30th film in the franchise, although I guess you'd call it a reboot. The screenplay was written by Max Borenstein, who has gone on to write the two sequels, Godzilla King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. Kong. This film took $500 million at the box office worldwide and has a 6.4 user rating on IMDb. So with all of that out of the way, Nick, what did you make of Godzilla?
I really like this movie. It harkens back to the originals that I used to watch as a kid on VHS and just wearing out the tape and wearing down the old VHS player. It checked off all the boxes. It's a near perfect Godzilla film in my eyes.
That is high praise, Nick. That's high praise.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm sad to say that I think you're probably a lot warmer on this film than I am. I think from my perspective, it was okay. I struggle to feel strongly about it, either negatively or particularly positively. And I think that my sort of neutrality of opinion comes down to the fact that I just didn't really care about what was happening in this film. I mean, it doesn't. I'm less interested in like glossy production values or high quality acting than I am in just needing to care about the story that I'm watching. And Aaron Taylor Johnson, I found him a very bland lead. Like Bryan Cranston was the only character that I really had an investment in, and quite a lot of the time in this film, I just felt like it was plodding along towards the inevitable big CGI fight.
No, excuse me, and those are all totally valid points. Like I absolutely on my whatever rewatch was kind of over Aaron Taylor Johnson. I'm just kind of he's okay. Like he doesn't really do much for me. The pacing is always something that's going to be a problem with Godzilla films, especially in this one because it does crack that 2-hour mark. And there are certainly some things we can kind of trim down or even skip out altogether. And a lot of films do that. And I understand why they want to do that, and they want to rebuild this backstory. And a lot of it, to me, is interesting just because you have this. How are they going to paint him this time? How are they talking about his creation? How are they going about that with the other monsters they're bringing in? So for me, that and the conspiracy aspect of it that harkens back to some of the older films, like I said, especially Godzilla versus Biollante. For me, it's checking those boxes. So I have a lot of people that are like, yeah, it was kind of boring or I didn't like it. Totally get it. But as a Godzilla fan, knocks it out of the park. And I like how they portray the fights. Like the fights are a little bit different. How we see the monsters are a little bit different than what we typically would. And I just think it's a little more creative vision of Godzilla in this movie.
Well, you mentioned the pace of this particular film, and I think that was something that was definitely mentioned by a lot of people. I remember when this film came out, I think, the pacing of this film did come up in reviews and in just people that I was talking to about this. And, Godzilla doesn't appear for over an hour, I think it is, into this film, and he's only on screen for 11 minutes. And as I say, I do remember quite a bit of grumbling on that particular point. So, yeah, where are you at with that particular aspect of the film?
Well, I mean, that's traditional. Like, I hate to keep saying, like, no, it's fine, it's cool. But growing up on all these films, like, you don't really see Godzilla a whole lot. He shows up, does his thing, and then he leaves. And it focuses on how we are as a society in that time, how we're feeling, what's going on, and then, boom, let's throw Godzilla in there with it. I do wish there was a little bit more of him. You always want that. But then at the end of the day, I also feel like too much of a good thing might be a bad thing. And then we'd end up with something horrible like Pacific Rim or something along the lines of that, where it's just a complete CGI festival. And it's just kind of like, all right, I'm over this. You know what I mean?
I have to say, I have seen the 2 sequels to this, but I don't remember them particularly clearly. Is there more Godzilla in those films, and is he involved in the action earlier? Because at the back of my mind, I have the sense that there was some sort of course correction with the later films, that they perhaps responded to some of the sort of criticism. Or am I imagining that, or does he get more involved and he's in the action earlier in those films?
No, you're absolutely right. He does get more involved, and he does show up earlier as the films progress. So the next one, Godzilla King of the Monsters, he's in there a little bit more. He's in there more often or earlier. And then definitely in Godzilla versus Kong, like he shows up out of nowhere, and it's go time. And it's just off we go to the races from there. So it's exciting that as we've gone on in the series, and I hope there's like a 4th one, that he's been showing up like more and more, but in a way that makes sense to the story. It's not just like, hey, here he is fighting something. Like, no, there's a reason he's out and fighting. There's a reason he's doing what he's doing.
Well, I do remember the criticism of the pacing of this film. For me, I'm not too bothered by it, actually, because, as I said earlier, I kind of need to care if I'm going to be interested in a film. And so I don't actually mind spending time building a story and perhaps going on a journey with the characters. And sure, I know what Godzilla looks like, and so it's not a surprise when he ultimately sort of turns up in the film. But you're sort of going on a journey with the characters. They don't know what the peril is that they are facing. So I didn't mind that particular aspect to it. And I think for the most part, actually, the pacing works pretty well. But unfortunately, we're spending a lot of time with characters I'm not terribly interested in and I don't really care about, which is, I guess, the ultimate issue with why I was a bit lukewarm on this film. So I just wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit more about the sort of the human drama that we get here, because we follow the travails of the Brody family here. Ford's lost his mum and his dad to these monsters. Now his wife and son are threatened, and when I say all that, it feels like there should be like a really big emotional heft in this film, but for me personally, that part of the film just didn't land. And I wondered, did it resonate more with you, Nick?
Yes and no. The Bryan Cranston and the wife scene, that hit me a little bit harder this time for some who knows what reason. Seeing Aaron Taylor Johnson's character wake up, and Bryan Cranston's character is like on a radio walkie-talkie, and he's trying to figure out certain things, seeing that just intensity within his eyes still, and that dedication and motivation of like, I'm gonna figure this thing out, like that kind of hits a little bit. But I think a lot of it is, as soon as they get to an interesting character arc, they step away and go do something else. As soon as we start to find out something interesting with Juliette Binoche character, gone. As soon as Bryan Cranston starts to figure stuff out and he's in the interrogation room, just like nailing the scene, all of a sudden he's gone. It gets to these points, and then they just kind of don't do anything with it, which does bum me out sometimes, because I want to see what that next step would be. We can kind of cut out or even re-edit some of the scenes to make it more interesting and kind of build that up, but it just doesn't have that pack. It doesn't have that wallop to it that you would want it to.
I completely agree with that point you were making about them just abandoning interesting character arcs. And, I think I mentioned already, found the Bryan Cranston character the most interesting person here. He's lost his wife, and then he's just like dedicated the next like 20 years of his life to trying to understand, what happened, and then feels like it's building to something interesting, and then, he's then out of the movie. And, then when I was thinking about that afterwards, you could actually just completely dispense of Bryan Cranston and Juliette Binoche as the parents of Aaron Taylor Johnson, because they both died is meant to be, put more of a burden on Aaron Taylor Johnson. The fact that his wife and child are in peril in San Francisco, it's like all this stuff is being put on him, but it doesn't actually really kind of come through in the film. And you could just chop Cranston and Binoche out of this film. You could have Godzilla heading towards San Francisco, where Aaron Taylor Johnson's wife and kid are, and the film would, that would be sufficient motivation for Aaron Taylor Johnson to kind of do what he does. The fact that his mom and his dad have both been, tied up in this thing doesn't actually kind of, amount to a hill of beans at the end.
Yeah, I mean, and really, when they're going through Bryan Cranston's stuff and they start to find all this data, that's when Ken Watanabe and that's when Sally Hawkins start getting excited about it. They're like, oh, we thought this data was gone. So really, like you said, they kind of take all of this, and the only thing that really comes from it is these extra 1 or 2 lines, and then boom, we get into like the creation of Godzilla and everything. If you wanted to do a different kind of edit, you could have it where it starts with Brody on the ship going over, and they're giving him the presentation on Godzilla, or the opening credit sequence. That's the presentation on Godzilla that they're giving to Brody, right? And they're talking to him because they found him in the zone with his dad. They never show it, but as the film goes on, they do little flashbacks to it. Little 5-minute, 6-minute snippets there, keeping the character interesting, keeping the other characters like involved and more interesting. So, and they kind of mirror what's going on. So then when you finally get to the big fight, he's feeling the emotions. He wants to do it because his dad is dead now, his mom is dead. And I think you have more of an emotional impact if you go along with him of like, here's this building emotion and sadness and maybe even anger. And then here's also this, like, I have no idea what's going on, because he's going through and they're like, hey, you got to go here. Hey, you got to go there. Hey, you got to go here. And it's like, look, I'm trying to go home to my wife and kids. And they're like, there's this mutant dinosaur thing and we don't know what's going on. And there's just this mass confusion. And I think if you mix that all together, it would work really, really well and hit a little bit harder emotionally than what it does.
Now, one thing I wanted to talk about was the message of this particular film. So the first Godzilla film was famously, a metaphor about nuclear weapons and, how nature was going to take revenge on mankind for creating these, destructive tools. But then over the years and through multiple sequels, the kind of moral critiques and societal messages sort of disappear somewhere along the line. However, with this film, there's a very clear attempt to update that original idea of Godzilla for the 21st century. So, as somebody who's a fan of the series, how good a job do you think, Gareth Edwards did here?
I think he does a really good job. And like you said, they kind of take that original concept of this is a metaphor for nuclear destruction and war, and they put a fresh coat of paint on it and they update it because now it's a facility that's been closed. There's nothing really wrong with it, but they're keeping something there. They're working on this project, and they've even said in it, look, it's nuclear. We didn't know what was going to happen if we tried to kill it. It could have destroyed millions and thousands, so we contained it. And then when they talk about the second one that's showing up, they're like, oh, where you put all your nuclear waste. And for me, it finally hit this time. I'm like, wait a second. That's never dawned on me. Where do we store our nuclear waste? And then come to find there's this whole facility out in the middle of nowhere where we're storing this stuff. And it's essentially like a prison of some sort. And we see that it's, broken out of the side of the mountain, which, how do you not notice that? But that's here nor there. But I think they do a really good job of just kind of updating it, and it doesn't really come to the forefront, and I feel like it's a little more subtle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think you're much more positive about the message of this film, and maybe it's just because you're more immersed in these films and the mythology, all behind them, because there's clearly this idea of man versus nature in this film, and that man can't win over nature. Nature is always more powerful, and I guess the idea is that these monsters are the punishment we deserve for what we the abuses that we have the kind of creating nuclear weapons and the abuses that we are sort of perpetrating on our environment. But so that idea seems to be there, but if Godzilla just rocks up and saves us, do we really need to worry about any of this?
Well, that's true, but then I think it comes to that double-edged sword. These nuclear weapons are going to be our destruction, but there's also weird ways where they can save us. I mean, if you look at World War II, we put a big end to part of that conflict with the work of nuclear materials. There's plenty of other countries right now that are developing them, and that makes everything a little more tense. But I don't know. It's one of those things. It's a real double-edged sword. It's something you have that can kill you, but it can also kill your enemy. So maybe it's not so bad to have around. And that's essentially what Godzilla is.
Okay, I think we better move on from this particular topic. But what did you make of the Godzilla that we get here? His appearance, his roar, his Godzilla breath, because there was a lot of controversy, among Godzilla fans anyway, about his appearance in the Roland Emmerich film, and certainly I remember I think Toho Studios were kind of furious with some of the things that he did there. So yeah, what did you make of the realization, the visualization of Godzilla in this movie?
I thought it was a great return to form. You just have the traditional, this big hulking mass kind of taking his time going through, the traditional spikes going down his back, the tail, the atomic breath that comes out. Oh my God, the claws, just everything. His presentation, I really dug the intensity and the feralness of his roar this time around. It felt more like jarring at times, whereas the other one, how they played it you can kind of tell like it didn't fit with that particular monster. But with this one, it's just like it's in your face. And ever since that first trailer, I was hooked and I was a fan. He's a little bit on the pudgy side, not gonna lie. He's a thicker boy for sure.
We need to get him on the treadmill.
Something. So we're not really used, and he swims how much, and he does all that work. You think a little slimmer, but I think that also plays to they're rebuilding it. They're looking at the idea of he's hundreds of thousands or however many years old he wants to be, and all the work that's been done around him and where he's been staying. So I think it works for the character. And I remember reading a lot of foreign countries were like, this is the American Godzilla, so of course it's fatter and meaner and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's funny. I get it. But But no, I was very happy on the improvements over the 98 Roland Emmerich film. And I also find it interesting that the film starts in like 99 in the Philippines, as if to say like, yeah, we're just going to erase what happened. Like, here's what's really going on. And I'm like, okay, I see what's up.
And, well, you mentioned the sound of Godzilla there, and I just want to broaden that point out a little bit, because one thing that I really did like about this film, without any equivocation, was actually the sound design. Like, I loved the sounds of all of the monsters in this movie, like Godzilla, but also the Mutos as well. And I think the use of sound and audio in this film, and they took a lot of care with the noises, I think, that they wanted to have these monsters make at different moments, and I really appreciated that, and I thought it really like heightened the three-dimensionality of the monsters in those moments.
It gives more of a depth to it. It doesn't feel so
Definitely
surface level, and it's monstrous. Whereas the other ones felt like, I don't want to say hokey monstery, but it's just that thing you expected. Whereas this one, it hits from a different place, and you're like, all right, this guy's he's not playing around this time. We're getting serious here.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at the exploding helicopter action.
You know, next week is our last mandatory session together. Do you feel like you're ready to be out on your own?
I'm trying as hard as I can. Trying as hard as I can.
Tom Sykes desperately wants a new life, a new home.
What was that?
What was what? Unless we have evidence that he's a danger to himself or to others, we can't hold him.
Haven't had any violent spells in a long time.
Is that because you feel safer now? I'm never gonna feel as safe as I want to.
He found the Dryers to be the perfect family.
Let's go, babe.
Okay.
Let's go, babe.
Now, he'll do anything to become one of them.
Right, Mom. Sleep tight. Love you. Love you too.
Love you too.
You like your new place? There's a family that lives there that I like very much. In fact, they make me want to have a family myself.
This is a guy who was brutalized by his parents for years. But we're talking about a guy who very deliberately set fire to his house and burned his parents to death.
Look, I don't know what you're doing here.
What I'm doing is I live here now. I live here with Julie.
I think you should go.
Neil. No.
He's up there.
Julie.
Planning. Watching. Waiting. Vestron Pictures presents Gary Busey, Mimi Rogers, Hyder in the house. How can they lock him out when he's already inside?
We're back, and now we're looking at the exploding helicopter action. The key scene takes place at an airport. Facing a monster with a height of around 400 feet, the chopper pilot goes in shooting and flies right under its left nipple. Unsurprisingly, the titular beastie immediately swats the chopper. There's a nice shot of the nervy airport crowd watching from behind a huge glass wall as the chopper hits a few airplanes and triggers a series of massive explosions. So, Nick, what did you make of the exploding helicopter action?
I thought it was fantastic. I don't think we've covered an explosion that had such a domino effect, because it's the hits just keep coming. It's a total it builds and builds and builds, and I thought that was just really cool, and also a really cool way to just bring those characters in, because we just kind of see the lower half of the bodies of the Muto. It's rolling along, and then bam, here's Godzilla's foot. And then we got that pan that comes all the way up with the fire and the explosions in the background. And he's just like, what's up? I'm here. Yelling right in his face. And it's just such a great, like, rolling preamble into what we've all been waiting for.
I'd absolutely agree. Yeah, that chain reaction is the exploding helicopter is the spark that lights that tinderbox of airplanes, because it's all these jet jets that are parked up at this airport that start exploding in this chain reaction. And it's a very sort of spectacular kind of sequence of explosions that we get here. I do. We do see once again, and I don't know whether to feel irritated or pleased, because otherwise this helicopter wouldn't have exploded. But, it's that old cliche again of helicopter pilots not being able to utilize, you would think, the obvious advantage of being in a aircraft, which is to stay above any kind of danger.
Yeah, I mean, if he's away and then he starts to see the creature move, it's like, oh, now I have to move, instead of being right in there and trying to maneuver around. Because with something like that, you don't know how fast it's going to react. If you're watching Godzilla, you can see, okay, moves a little bit slower. I can kind of get past him with some of the attack. But this Muto, moving a little quick. It's getting and going at times.
And there's absolutely no reason for this helicopter pilot to be that close to the action. It's not like they're using a weapon that only has a certain range or anything. They can easily stay hundreds of feet, above the fray here and be perfectly safe. But obviously, we can't complain too much, because if it doesn't fly too low, it doesn't get swatted, and it doesn't explode, and it doesn't give us the fiery aviation treat that we both love and enjoy so much.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. Wholeheartedly agree. And you know what else I kind of like too? Yeah, it's very over the top how the explosions just keep happening. But in a weird way, it also feels like kind of realistic, because that's what would happen. It would just be a chain reaction with all these planes and other parts nearby and all that fuel that's in the area. Like, it's definitely plausible that it would happen like that.
I choose to believe, Nick. I choose to believe. Okay, I think that just about wraps things up for this show. Nick, before you slip quietly beneath the ocean's water to await humanity's next crisis, or at least my next podcast guest emergency, would you like to tell people where they can find you online?
Yeah, really quick. Movie Rob has his new Die Hard Minute podcast. He had me on as a guest. We covered minutes 56 through 60. Had a great time. Those episodes are out. And recently, Mark Hoffmeyer had me on Movies, Films, and Flicks, and we discussed our favorite movie jumps. And the Halo jump scene from this movie made my list, and we discussed some others, and it was a whole lot of fun.
Excellent work, Nick. As always, don't forget to check out the Exploding Helicopter website for movie reviews and information about films where helicopters explode. If you can rate, review, or retweet us, we'd be very grateful. We'll be back soon, but until then, keep watching the skies for those exploding helicopters.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control, and not the other way around.